Hey everybody, Donkey Storm here, and I'm back after quite a hiatus to bring you a new World of Warcraft guide. Today we're going to talk about how you can succeed in the WoW Mythic Plus PUG scene, specifically reaching the Keystone Master achievement in any given season. Don't get me wrong, organized and coordinated groups are definitely the way to go, but that might not be feasible for all of us. Maybe you've got a hectic playing schedule, maybe no one likes you, maybe you're like me, you have a hectic playing schedule and no one likes you. Either way, there's lots of reasons why pugging is your only option. I'm going to break this guide into 3 sections: finding a group, performing in your groups, and having the right mindset while playing. Whether you're a newer player or looking to get into M+, or just want to try and push higher keys, I hope you find this helpful. If you do, I'd appreciate a like on the video or a subscribe so you can see more videos from me in the future. Alright, let's get started. So my first tip is to work on your Raider IO score. You may not like it, but if you're planning on doing serious pugging in M+, you simply have to play the Raider IO game. Raider IO is a third-party add-on and website that gives you a score based on your M+ performance. There are plenty of videos out there on the details of raising your IO score and how that score works, so I'll leave a link to one of my favorites by Growl in the description. Raider IO score is the #1 thing pugs look at when deciding whether or not to invite you, and whether you like it or not, it's really the only tangible measure of skill that anybody's got to determine if they want to invite you or not. I recommend actively working on this score. When starting on a new toon, I usually like to try and work my way across every dungeon at a particular level, and then raise that level. For example, I might start by doing every dungeon at a 5, then an 8, then a 10, and so on, working my way up toward the 15s. This way I'm maximizing my IO score for the level of dungeons I'm able to get invited to and complete. It's also a nice way to gradually gather gear and gain experience in each dungeon without overwhelming yourself. And since Raider IO just takes your best score from every dungeon and adds them together, having a decent score in every dungeon ensures you're making the most of your score. My next tip is to know the meta, and notice that I'm saying know the meta and not necessarily play the meta. There's no reason any class or spec can't pug their way up to KSM, but let's be honest with ourselves here. There's definitely a pecking order when it comes to what specs get groups first. So what's meta? Just head over to the Raider IO website and look at the leaderboards. Whatever classes are plastered across the first few pages of keys are what people are going to be looking for most. So for the current patch, you see a lot of Demon Hunter tanks, Pally healers, Boomkins, Fire mages, Outlaw rogues. I'm not saying this is correct or necessary. Like I said, there's no reason any spec can't succeed in most M+ keys. Both the classes I've gotten to KSM this season, neither of them are considered fully meta. They're also not meme specs. But if you want to make things a little easier on yourself and one of these specs interests you, you may want to check it out. Obviously, tanks are in short supply, so you'll have no problem finding a group as a tank, even if you're playing very off-meta choice until you start climbing higher anyway. Healers are largely the same situation, though it's a bit more competitive, and of course DPS is going to be the most competitive role. And while a decent eye level and Raider IO score will go a long way in helping yourself out, you're going to need to have patience here, especially if you're going full meme build, survival hunter, or something like that. More power to you, I just want you to know what you're getting yourself into. If you're really struggling, you can always push your own key and create your own groups as well, which is something I highly recommend you do. Okay, my last tip for finding a group is actually making sure the group meets your standards. So you've finally been invited. I want you to do something before you get too excited though. Inspect each member of your group. There's a lot of boosting that goes on in lower and mid-level keys, and you may not want to be a part of that. If you see a person who is way under geared for a dungeon, I'd leave personally. Sometimes they'll have some super over-geared buddy who's going to try and carry the group, which can work to some extent, but you'll have to use your judgment on whether or not it's worth sticking around for. In addition to that, take a look at the overall group comp and make sure there's nothing too egregious like running 3 melee on Spiteful Week or something that you feel just dooms the group from the start. You can save yourself some headache by checking stuff like this out before you start rather than noticing it the hard way and have the group fall apart halfway through the dungeon. Like I've said, most things are viable until you get to the very high key range, but it's worth at least checking to make sure there are no red flags before you start. Okay, so that's finding a group. Now, what about playing? My first tip for playing is to know the mechanics. This might seem obvious, but according to a lot of things that I see, maybe it's not so much. So you got in a group, and now it's the fun part, timing keys. And first and most important thing to know is the mechanics of the dungeon. And not just the boss mechanics, but literally every mechanic in the dungeon. In Shadowlands, pretty much every trash pack has some mechanic that can be really painful or deadly if not dealt with correctly. These are sometimes hard to notice in low level keys because they won't do that much damage, but as things ramp up, not dealing with these mechanics properly will likely result in a group wipe, someone dying, or unnecessary use of cooldowns that need to be saved for other parts of the dungeon. While learning this stuff will mostly come from experience, you can definitely help yourself out on the front end. In the description of this video, I'll leave a link to some nice Dungeon Week auras that will pop up warnings on your screen for many mechanics. And I'll also link a video by Quasi where he goes through literally every pull of every dungeon one by one and what they do. It's really long. Don't watch it in one sitting, but it's well worth a look. Again, I can't stress enough how big a point this is. If you can handle all the mechanics of a dungeon, you'll be able to succeed far beyond your item level or your overall DPS or HPS or whatever. My next point is play your class. Abraham Lincoln once said, "Whatever you are, be a good one." And I bet Abe's IO score was fucking gigantic because he really knew what he was talking about. If you want to improve your dungeon performance, you need to fully learn to play your class. Obviously, knowing your damage rotation, using your defensive cooldowns, etc. is important. But I think we often get too hung up looking at overall damage or HPS of a dungeon. Do all the good things your class is capable of doing. I'll speak from a Death Knight perspective since that's what I main. Are you using AMZ on Prides or wherever else it's going to save your group from taking lots of damage? Are you death gripping mobs that are standing behind the pack free casting so they can get cleaved down? Are you using Abomination Limb at opportune times like the ads on a Marth or Madretha so your group can just blow them up? Are you interrupting the right casts? When I finish a key, I want my group to say, "Damn, it was nice to have a DK in that dungeon." Obviously, maximizing your DPS, HPS, survivability, or whatever role you're playing is important. You should do research on your class and make sure you're executing your rotation correctly. There are loads and loads of videos and guides on every class, so I'd recommend taking some time to look at them and learning to play your rotation to the point where it's nearly muscle memory. It sort of frees up your brain for those dungeon mechanics and other tasks. I'd also recommend finding a streamer or YouTuber or someone who plays the class that you're trying to learn and making that person kind of like your spirit animal for your class or spec. Watching somebody else play your spec at a really high level or in really high keys can teach you a lot of things about how to play it properly or mistakes you might be making. The last and very specific thing I want to talk about is think before you release. It's very specific, but it's crazy. If you die and it's not a full wipe, think before you hit that release button. I can't tell you how many times I've seen minutes go to waste off of a timer because someone releases when they could have easily been rezzed. Likewise, I also see people die literally on top of release points and sit and wait for a res. Knowing the res points will come with time and experience, but if you're not sure, I'd ask in group before hitting that button because this can be a crippling setback for your group, especially if you did some kind of a skip. So in the last section of this video, I want to talk about your mindset because I think this low-key could be the number one way you can improve your time in Mythic Plus. So before wrapping things up, I want to talk about mindset and how you should approach this endeavor. I really think mindset gets in the way of a lot of players' success in Mythic Plus, especially in PUGs. So I want to add a couple points to how I think you should approach pugging dungeons. And the first thing is, think of every dungeon as an opportunity for you to improve as a player. Mythic Plus is a team game, but as a member of that team, you should always be looking inward and thinking about how you can do better before worrying about what other people are doing. There's always something we can get better at, and I kind of like to approach every playing session with something in mind. For example, I was playing my Holy Priest the other day and noticing I was contributing very little damage. So for the rest of that session of play, I wanted to focus on making sure I was using Holy Fire on cooldown and got some Shadow Word Pains up when I could. Maybe you're holding a cooldown too long or not keeping a buff up. There's tons of things you might choose to work on, but please don't approach the game with the attitude that every mistake you make is an unlucky accident, while every mistake your teammates make is out of ignorance. You will not get better with this attitude. Just watching the videos that are running as I go over this stuff in the background, I notice things here and there that I wish I would have done differently, or I think, oh man, next time I need to make sure I kick that cast or use a defensive at this part. We should always be looking for things that we can improve in our own play. Next thing I want to talk about is teach instead of toxic, because I firmly believe that toxicity depletes keys, and I mean almost immediately. Once you start getting a firm handle of dungeon mechanics, you will also start to notice particular areas where it's common for people to make mistakes. For example, in Theater of Pain on the teleporter platforms leading up to Kultharok, there are casters that put a nasty curse on people. As a priest, I can't dispel curses, but I can't tell you how many times I've been grouped with a class that can and just never did. I'd get really frustrated because it made getting through this wing a lot harder than it needed to be, and if it caused a wipe for some reason because someone got feared from that curse, it's pretty easy to want to say something like, "Hey, you fucking orangutan, can you put remove curse on your bars, please?" But honestly, I feel like the moment someone says something like that, the key is done. It triggers people, it causes them to make even more mistakes, and just sort of causes the insults to fly from there. Because if you say something like that, you better be ready for some kind of comeback of something you're forgetting to do, or you're not doing as well as you could. So now, before we get to those platforms, I'll usually just quickly type something in chat like, "Hey, can you please dispel curse here?" And 90% of the time, they'll do it. Maybe they just didn't know. You're not going to be grouping with a bunch of MDI players when you pug, otherwise you wouldn't be pugging. I bet that player that you told to dispel curses will probably dispel curses on that platform from now on too, because of you. My last thing for mindset is just know you will not time every key. Just get it in your head now. It's not going to happen. At least now in 9.0.5, there's still Valor points in it for you. Even if you feel like it's not really your fault, you should always think about what you could have done to make things go smoother. Just remember that even depleted keys are a chance to practice and improve and not make the same mistakes twice. So that's going to pretty much do it for what I think will help your experiences pugging groups in Mythic Plus. I think by following these steps, you give yourself a good chance of succeeding in the pug world. I hope you found these tips helpful, and if you did, or you feel like I left something out, please drop a comment and let me know. Until next time, this has been Donkey Storm. Have fun pugging.